Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Medlock Post radio show, and I'm your host, Richard G. Medlock. Welcome. This is the program where we entertain, educate, enlighten, and empower. Today is July 25th, 2022, and today's episode is The American Education System, Part 1. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Part 1. There's so much to talk about concerning our education system. The views and opinions on the Medlock Post radio show are the views and opinions of the host. They are not necessarily the views and opinions of Spreaker.com, its corporations, affiliates, or any other podcast streaming services. Ladies and gentlemen, a new week, a new beginning, and a new start at a lot of things. And that's what we're here doing today. All right. We are, again, happy to be here, happy to have you with us, and we look forward to the education process today. There's a lot to cover today, so I'm going to focus on education except for two things. Number one, for the climate eco-terrorist, it is summertime. It's supposed to be hot. Thank you. Number two, watch this thing with Joe Biden and COVID. Something just doesn't smell right there, folks. It doesn't smell right. They're coming out with all this information. When he first got sick, the last few days he was slurring because he didn't feel good. Well, so that means he's been not feeling good his whole presidency. And then they come out, his doctor came out, we've had to take him off his blood thinner, so he has a high probability of having a stroke. Why are they telling us these things? And they've said other things. They tried to bring him out of the basement the other day and do something about oil and the prices, and that was a disaster. So what's going on here? Second question is, where is Kamala Harris? Is she right there, waiting for the announcement? The other thing is this stuff with Hunter Biden is kicking up. I understand that it has gone to a grand jury and there could be an indictment. If there's an indictment, is Joe Biden going to resign? Are the Democratic Socialists really trying to get rid of Joe Biden? Watch it, folks. I might be totally wrong, but there's something that smells here. All right, that out of the way. Education. Education is an important part of the American society. It has been the important part of all societies. It can make or break a society. It can make or break a country. We're seeing that in the United States of America. Now, I want to first turn my attention to Milton Friedman, a great economist, an Adam Smith economist, a supply and demand side economist. And I want to turn to him. He wrote an essay in 1991. And in that essay, well, let's go back to the title of the essay. Why Government is the Problem. Now, we can list a lot of things, right? But he wrote this essay in 1991. It was again published in the Hoover Institution Press in 1993, and the essay was it's called Essay in Public Policy number 39, Stanford, California. So at the University of Stanford. It's interesting. I want to read the first 2 paragraphs of the essay to set the stage of what he is doing. And then we're going to see what he says about education. So let's start with his opening paragraphs. In his essay, Why Government is the Problem. And folks, you can find this online if you want to go read the full thing. I'll eventually go through the whole thing as we go through the shows down the road. Milton Friedman, Why Government is the Problem. He starts out with this, quote, when a preacher gives a sermon, he usually has a text. Generally, the text expresses a thought that he agrees with and is going to expound. I have been trying to find the word for an anti-text because I have a text for this essay that I am persuaded is wholly wrong. The text comes from the September-October 91 issue of Freedom Review. About as inappropriate a place as possible. It is the statement, quote, Reagan's fatuous doctrine that government is the problem, unquote. And Reagan was the president. Continuing, that's my text, or my anti-text for this essay. The text leaves me 2 tasks, one easy, one difficult. The first task is to demonstrate that government is the problem. That's the easy task. The hard task is to understand why government is the problem. Why is it that able, public-spirited people produce such different results according to whether they operate in the political or the economic market? Why is it that if a random sample of the people who read this essay and are not at present in Washington were to replace those who are in Washington, our policies would very likely not be improved? That is the real puzzle for me. And he finishes up, as to the easy task, let me just first count the ways to plagiarize words from a love poem in which government is the problem. Let's list our major social problems and ask where they come from, unquote. All right, so you can hear the music in the background. That means that it's time for our first break. We will be right back after these messages. All right, we are back. This is the Medlock Post radio show, and I am your host, Richard G. Medlock. We're talking about Milton Friedman, and I just read his first 2 paragraphs of his essay, Why the Government is the Problem. It's interesting that when you look at all of the things that he lists, the first thing he lists is education. It's at the top of the list that he addresses. And there's a reason for that. And continuing with Milton Friedman, this is what he said about education and why government is the problem. Quote, one major social problem is clearly the deterioration of our educational system. Remember, this was in 1991. Continuing, next to the military, Education is the largest socialist industry in the United States. Total government spending on schooling, I call it schooling rather than education because not all schooling is education and vice versa, comes close to total government spending on defense. If, with the so-called peace dividend, it is not already greater. The amount spent per pupil in the past 30 years has tripled in real terms after allowing for inflation. Although input has tripled, output has been going down. Schools have been deteriorating. The problem is unquestionably produced by the government. Unquote. Now let's break that down real quick. We've got military spending and education spending. He's saying that education spending is more than military spending. So why are schools deteriorating? But see, that's been the philosophy all these years. Just throw more money at it. That's the government's mindset. Just throw more money at it. And then the output of students has gone down. The input of money has gone up, but the output of educated students has gone down. And when he talks about deteriorating, he's not talking about the physical buildings or the books. He's talking about the quality of education or schooling. And today, I think, we can call it indoctrination. When we look at what's coming out today in 2022. So, the American education system, ladies and gentlemen, here is the question I want to address. How did the education system in the United States of America arrive at its current condition? And it's not because there's been more money put into it. It's because of ideology. Now, where did that ideology come from? Well, let's kind of go down a little history lesson here. History lesson. It started in the early 1900s with Karl Marx, his Communist Manifesto, replacing Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, in the universities in the United States. So basically, instead of teaching freedom, free enterprise, or capitalism, they wanted to turn around and start teaching basically slavery. All you got to do is look at your universities today. In 1980, we'll get back to some more timelines in a little bit. In 1980, the textbook, The History of the United States by Howard Zinn, replaced real history textbooks. And when I say real history textbooks, Howard Zinn came out in his History of the United States as a total fictitious, turning American history upside down, making the founding fathers look like a bunch of white supremacists, rapists, slave owners, etc. Made Christopher Columbus look like a greedy, want to conquer the world, rapist, murderer, killing of Indians, and all so forth and so on. Just lie after lie after lie. And this became the textbook in the schools for a long time. It might even still be there. All right. So again, the manifesto of Communist Party by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels is taking over in the universities. In the 1930s, the German Nazi Party started a massive book burning. Adolf Hitler. He took a society, a Christian society, started pulling in paganism into that Christian society, and eventually paganism took over. But how did he do that? He had to destroy the society and the culture. And to do that, you burn books, you tear down statues, you change history or forget history. So this is what he was doing. At the same time, Joseph Stalin in Russia and Benito Mussolini in Italy were doing the same thing, and other countries were doing it. At the end of World War II, Russia and communism controlled most of Eastern Europe. But how did they get that control? It was through a war, it was through force. So communism set its sights on the Americas, especially the United States of America. The Communist Party realized that they could not come into the United States with the same tactics as they ruled with in Germany, Italy, and Russia. They fully understood that the American people would reject and stop a movement based on the past burning crusades and also on communist philosophy and ideology. They devised a more subtle and quiet way to take over American education and knowledge. And that was to gain control over education and control the content that was written into educational textbooks. And you say, wait a minute. Whoa, communists were doing all this? Pay attention here, folks. We're not through. That's why this is going to be part 1 of part 2. Sadly, America has seen the full circle of the communist plan succeed in controlling the minds and even thoughts and even actions of the American public. You starting to see a picture here? Now let's go back to the Founding Fathers. They looked at 3 things to create a society to maintain freedom. 1, religion, morality, and knowledge. So, now I'm not going to talk about religion and morality in this context today, but it all ties in here. So, knowledge. This is what they said about knowledge. Quote, an intellectual awareness and understanding of established facts relating to any field of human experience or inquiry, history, geography, science, etc. Unquote. In the nation's beginning, the Founding Fathers desired the Bible to be one of the textbooks in the schools. The government printed the Bibles to provide for the schools to use to teach. Now why? It was, you said, oh, they want to convert them to a religion. No, that was not the purpose. They didn't want to convert anybody to a specific religion, i.e. Baptist, Methodist, whatever, but to help the young children learn correct morals and correct behavior. And also it was a great tool for learning how to read. Okay? Some schools, even universities, used it as a literature book, to study it as literature, because there's some great poetry, some great literature in there. All right, here's a couple of quotes. Ayn Rand. Quote, the only purpose of education is to teach a student how to live his life by developing his mind and equipping him to deal with reality. The training is theoretical, i.e. conceptual. He has to be taught to think, to understand, and to prove. Unquote. This lays out a great educational process. To develop the mind, equip them to deal with reality. Folks, we have so many people in America that were unequipped for this. They cannot deal with reality. They're offended by everything. They're offended by anything that somebody says that they don't like. That's not dealing with reality. They need to be taught to think, to understand, and to prove. And to prove is to question. Now, deal with the reality. I saw this morning at the University of Michigan yesterday, they had their opening in their auditorium for all the first year medical students. They got their white coats on, parents are there, and here's this speaker. She's the head of one of their departments, their medical departments, and she's pro-life. Well, they tried to get a petition for the school not to invite her, but they ignored it. So when she was introduced and she's walking up to the podium, several dozen of the new students and some of their parents got up and walked out of the auditorium. This is not dealing with reality, not wanting to sit there and listen to someone of a different view. She did not address any of that. She addressed the medical school, their expectations. Now, if I were head of that medical school, those first-year students that just walked out are gone. Sorry, we'll see you. You're not a student here anymore. Go somewhere else. That's how you deal with that. Ronald Reagan did that when he was governor of California, and they're doing all these protests at these universities. He put a stop to it by doing stuff like that. Second quote, Thomas Jefferson in a letter in 1820, quote, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves." That's the first sentence, or the first line. No safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. He's talking about we the people. We the people have the power, the ultimate powers of the society. He continues, "And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education." And the last sentence he says, "This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power." Unquote. Education. So, as Milton Friedman was saying, government has done just the opposite in education, or allowed it to happen. And this is what we're trying to address and help you understand, so that when we go to school board meetings and county council meetings and we go in and meet with our teachers, we're prepared. We know what we're talking about. And to fight this wrong education that's taking place. All right, we have another break that has come upon us. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back. Do not go anywhere. Okay, my light has come back on, so we're back on the air. This is the Medlock Post. I'm your host, Richard G. Medlock. We're talking about the education system in the United States, and we're addressing the question, how did the education in the United States arrive at its current situation? Well, let me give you a quote before we continue. Well, this is part of it, really. John W. Taylor was the leader, the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints back in the 1880s. But he has a great quote that really applies here, and it was as a warning then as it is today. We've just forgot some of these warnings that we were given through the years by religious leaders, from politicians, from just citizens. John Taylor, quote, "There are wolves among us in sheep's clothing, ready to lead astray our little ones. Wolves do not devour our sheep our old sheep when there are young ones. Protect your young. Protect your children," unquote. A powerful warning in today's area. And we're seeing the wolves eat our children up. Not literally, but figuratively. And we're going to go through and show you how they've been doing this. Remember a few episodes ago, I brought up the fact that there were 45 communist goals to take over America. This was developed through the FBI task force on communism, the 1940s and 50s. These 45 goals were read into the congressional record in 1963. And we read 3 then when we were talking about the Constitution and how it's being attacked, because those 3 were basically make the Constitution is no good for us today. The founding fathers were a bunch of old white men who didn't care about anybody but themselves. Da 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 da. So now we have a few more goals that I'm going to talk about, because education was some of those goals. Now, Nikita Khrushchev became the dictator or the premier of the USSR, United Socialist States of Russia. In 1954, when Joseph Stalin died. So Nikita Khrushchev was really a bad dude. He really was. And he made these quotes in the late 50s, 1960, about America. He would come to the UN, cause a scene, but here's 3 of his quotes that he made. Quote 1, "We will take America without firing a single shot. We will bury you." Quote 2, "We can't expect the American people to jump from capitalism to communism, but we can assist their elected leaders in giving them small doses of socialism until they awaken one day to find that they have communism." And third quote, "We do not have to invade the United States. We will destroy you from within," unquote. These are 3 popular quotes. Look them up. Nikita Khrushchev. There's more, but these make the point I want to make. Going back to what I said earlier, they could not come in here with force, so they devised this subtle plan to come in and step by step by step take over America. And there were 45 goals or steps. Now, here's goal number 15. And this is important to remember. Capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Well, I think we can safely say that they've taken over one and partially taken over the other one. This has been done indirectly through democratic socialists in both the Republican and Democratic parties, who have used Congress, the White House, and the State Department to foster policies favorable to communist countries at the expense of the security and the economic interest of the United States and its allies. Remember I told you Woodrow Wilson started the League of Nations. That failed, and then they came on later and started the United Nations. This is part of that plan, folks. And then the Center for Foreign Relations started under Roosevelt. This was part of that plan. Goal 17. Get control of the schools. use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda, soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations, and I think we can add to that today school boards, put the party line in textbooks. Now, I think we can agree, folks, that has been completed 100%. Getting control included permeating the culture with corrosive and false perspectives about true principles of freedom and about those who brought them about in America. For example, painting Western culture, capitalism, and traditional American values as divisive, one-sided, greedy, racist, or old-fashioned is commonplace today. We hear this. Capitalism is attacked. No, you got to have socialism. We protect everybody. Well, guess what, folks? Capitalism did just the opposite of what they're telling you it does. It's the greatest economic system that we have. And wow, there's the break thing again, the break music. So let's go to a break. We'll come back with the rest of these goals to help you understand how we got here in America in our education system. We'll be right back. All right. This is the Medlock Post radio show, and this is Richard G. Medlock, your host. We are back. Let's continue with another goal of the communists to take over America. Goal number 18. Gain control of all student newspapers. Analogous to Goal 17, a vast majority of American student newspapers began reflecting the same anti-establishment, anti-authority perspectives, a trend which started in the 1960s. The old anti-establishment, folks, in the 1960s. I remember those days. They were turbulent. We had it started with the beatniks and with the hippies, and the drug culture came in, and make love, not war, peace to everybody. But let's take over. Let's destroy the establishment. So anti-establishment. Guess who were part of that movement? Bill and Hillary Clinton. They weren't married at the time, but they were still part of it in different parts of the world. John Kerry was a big part of that. Joe Biden, his brother, Nancy Pelosi, her husband, on and on. They were part of that movement. They were Saul Alinskyites, every one of them. And every one of them have done their best to destroy this country and to destroy education. And I'm still working on a program about the 1960s. It will blow your mind, unless you were there. All right, goal number 19. Use student riots to foment public protest against programs or organizations which are under communist attack. And ladies and gentlemen, that started in the 1960s. The attempt was to amplify popular anger toward U.S. institutions that were targeted for elimination by the communists. The communists were getting the American students and teenagers and young adults to do their work. They had brainwashed them. They had brainwashed them in the universities. They had brainwashed them in the streets. They had got them using drugs so they weren't thinking clearly, and it's easy to take them over. Thomas Sowell said, quote, "Our education system may not teach students much math or science, but students learn from gutless academic administrators that mob rule is the way to get what you want and to silence those who disagree with you." Unquote. Amen, Thomas Sowell. Mob rule is the way to get what you want. Are we seeing that? We've seen that since the 60s. Mob rule. That's what BLM, Antifa? Mob rule? Communist goal number 19 has been met. Communist goal number 41. Emphasize, listen carefully to this one. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to the suppressive influence of parents. Distancing children from home values is the basic theme in many sociology experiments underway today. The policies underlying federally funded child care programs and preschool perpetuate those themes of "it takes a village to raise a child." They did a great job of taking the fathers out of the picture through the welfare system. That was a goal, folks. And I mean, Joe Biden a couple of months ago stood there and says, "Your children aren't yours, they're ours." The Secretary of Education said the same thing. They're our children. They're our children. Going back to John Taylor, "There are wolves among us in sheep's clothing, ready to lead astray our little ones. Wolves do not devour old sheep when there are young ones around." When we look at what they're doing to our young, they're devouring them through the sex ed classes. They're devouring them through this gender, transgender thing, through this name thing. Him, they, her, what. This is all part of the communist plan. And when I say that, you say, well, that's in our schools. Well, that's fine. The schools are run by the communists or their ideology now. They might not have their hands directly on it now, but they created those that would carry it forth. Now, Richard, this is conspiracy. Yeah, well, it is not. Goal 25. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazine, motion pictures, radio, and TV. And now we can add internet and schools. What is being taught in our public schools today is socialist communist promiscuity. That is what's taking place. You see why we're going to spend two episodes on this? Yeah, you're sitting there going, well, what's wrong with pornography? What's wrong with obscenity in books, magazine, motion? That's because you've been desensitized to these things. That was the plan. I can tell you some stories from the 60s and 70s about how all of this started and came about. The one is the Supreme Court ruling in the 70s that said pornography is protected by the First Amendment, freedom of speech. It has been a total disaster since then. Mark Twain said, quote, God made the idiot for practice, then he made the school board, unquote. I love that quote, especially in today's world when parents are standing up against the school boards that wants to teach all these crazy wacko things, and the parents started standing up against communism. And what did the Department of Justice under Biden do? They started going after them as domestic terrorists. But all they were doing was protecting their young from the wolves. And that's what we have to continue to do. Okay, some other things that fell into place in all of this. In 1963, the Supreme Court said you can't have prayer, Bible reading, or the Ten Commandments in a school. You have to take it out. Well, we're seeing that wasn't such a good idea. 1970, desegregation was ordered by the Supreme Court. Now, I was already in college at the time, but I had a lot of friends still back in high school, and I'd call them or I'd come home on break or something. They told me horrendous stories about that process. We were told, hey, look, the minorities are over here, and their schools aren't as good as yours. Well, whose fault was that? The government's, right? It wasn't our fault. So we're going to desegregate and put everybody in the same schools so we can raise up the minorities. But that's not what they did. They lowered the education system. It was done on purpose. 1979, under Jimmy Carter, the Federal Department of Education was created. We're going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow. That has been a total debacle. And we've been calling for years and years and years to do away with it. But we're going to talk about that tomorrow. 1980, The History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Talked about that earlier. In the 1980s, sex education in schools began. Now, at that time, it was the basics of sex. Now, I remember my son came home one day from middle school, junior high, when I went to school, but he was in the 8th grade, had a form. We're going to start teaching sex education in this class for the next so many weeks. Your son your child can stay in this or go to a study hall. Well, we signed off to go to a study hall. We as parents should be educating our kids about this and about the morals, the beauty of sex within the marriage, a proper place. No, there's a bunch of guys out there going, Medlock, you're just... Now, it is radical sex education, like I talked about earlier. I mean, they're showing pornography to 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds. In the 2000s, critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, just massive brainwashing theories. 2019, the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones, which said, no, this is when the history of America began, and then it was total BS. She said so after winning all kind of awards. Oh, it's all made up. But it's still being printed, and schools are still buying it, and it's still going to be a textbook. Why? Because it's false. Peter Braun taught us, quote, education makes a people easy to lead, but difficult to drive, easy to govern, but impossible to enslave, unquote. All right, there's our break music. So we'll be right back after these messages. And we're back. This is the Medlock Post radio show, and this is Richard G. Medlock, your host. I hope you're getting a grasp of what I've been saying today, these facts that I'm laying out for you to see how the American education system got to its current position, its current status in the United States. And you think the pandemic was all about the pandemic? No, it was about gaining control. Look what they did to the children in this country by shutting down the schools. It set them back 2 years. And the low-income children probably set them back further than that. All right, the last part of our program today, I want you to think about this. In our last episode, we talked about vision. Now, a vision is the ability to think about a plan or plan the future with imagination or wisdom. Someone or something that thinks about the future or advances in a creative and imaginative way. A person who is ahead of his time and who has a powerful plan for change in the future as it is an example of visionary. A visionary. Well, how many of these people out protesting in the streets have a vision? Do they really have a vision? Do they want to change anything or go backwards? It almost appears like they want to go backwards, even though they're saying we don't want to go backwards, but they do. Yeah, I know it's crazy. It's a concept you have to think about to grasp. A legacy. The things a person does and achieves throughout a lifetime form a powerful legacy that others will remember about them. The way you act and what you pass down to others will shape your legacy. This includes the way you treat and inspire others. For nearly 2 years, a pandemic of biblical proportions has enveloped our planet, and while that plague brought to halt to almost everything socially, obviously it did not bring a halt to brutality, violence, and a cruel aggression politically, nationally or internationally. As if that were not enough, we are still facing long-standing social and cultural challenges, ranging from economic deprivation to environmental desecration to racial inequality and more. Such stuff wins lost my place. I've got it back. Such stiff winds and dark days can be discouraging to the youth among us, those to whom we look for optimism and enthusiasm regarding the tomorrows of our lives. It has been said that, quote, "The power of youth is the commonwealth for the entire world. The young are the faces of our future," unquote. Kailash Satyarthi, in his Thoughts for Being Young, in Forbes, India, February 25th, 2021. Our children are the trustees into whose hands the destiny of this country, our communities, the world, our churches, our schools will be placed. Let's get control of this situation so it can be better. Given our current times, it is understandable if the idealism of the young is waning a little. And that's a understatement. Dr. Laurie Santos, a professor at Yale University, recently created a class titled Psychology and the Good Life. The first year the class was offered, nearly 1/4 of the entire undergraduate student body enrolled. This is at Yale. Over 64 million people visited her podcast. Writing about this phenomenon, one journalist noted how painful it is to see so many bright young students and adults desperately looking for something they've lost, or worse yet, longing for something they never had. And that is so true. My plea today to our youth, and to you parents and adults who advise them, is to begin your search for happiness by embracing the bounty we have already received from the giver of every good gift. One more quote about education from Martin Luther King Jr. Quote, "Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education," unquote. Sadly, we're seeing the character coming out of education that is not a character that is acceptable to a good, moral, religious, knowledgeable society. This is part 1 on education. Part 2 will be our next episode, continuing our conversation about education. You don't want to miss that one either. And that, folks, is the Medlock Post for today. May God bless America. Thank you and have a great day.